In 2018, during Anime North, this happened to one of my friends, which we'll call her Charlie. Charlie went with her boyfriend Robert and her two friends Josh and Connor. Now, Charlie, Lee, and Josh, along with Connor and Robert, had been all friends for a while. Robert had taken her to many places. They decided to give Anime North a try since it was in Toronto and it's basically a once a year type thing. It was on the May 24 weekend, pretty much, or at least around there. So that meant, and Charlie and Robert would be going there as a couple, while Josh and Connor went as both friends. When they got there, they ended up unpacking, get settled into a really nice hotel room. It had a pool, decent breakfast, and they had a lot of different things. The first they got there was Friday, and they probably arrived there at the check-in time, which was around 3 p.m. They went to the hotel room and they decided to relax there, unpack, and do whatever they needed to do. Once they got that out of the way, they decided that they would go and explore the area as the convention was still going on. After an hour of getting settled in, it was around 4, so they decided to go and check out some places. There were a couple of booths in the convention area, where there would be people selling stuff. There was a couple of anime-related stuff, like, some older anime, even from the 90s, even the recent new animes that are still coming out. There was a couple of people who were visiting that year that they got autographs from. However, Robert and Charlie were able to get at least a couple gifts from there, as they really enjoyed their time at Anime North. However, it was around dinner time, so they went to a pretty big and pretty decent place to eat food. The dinner there was actually quite decent. Maybe it wasn't the best food they had, but it was definitely not terrible. However, though, something really started to go downhill. Now, it wasn't really downhill or anything, but they just didn't pay attention to their surroundings. There was a lot of people, so there were expected to be some strange people. Some people maybe with some, mental disorders or something, is what their thoughts were. However, after they ate dinner, they went to a bar, which they drank. However, Charlie got pretty much a little wasted, and since she wasn't feeling well, it was around probably 8 o'clock. Of course, it was still daylight out, but it was around the time people started drinking. Robert took Charlie to her bedroom, and Robert was going to stay, but of course Josh and Connor asked if Robert wanted to do some guy time. So he told Charlie that she could stay in the room and not to leave until they get back, and that to call Josh, Connor, or himself, or Robert, if anything happened. Charlie fell asleep as soon as they left, and of course they fell asleep. Of course, when Charlie woke up, it was maybe around 10 o'clock. The boys were still not back yet, so they were both probably still doing their own thing. However, though, the door to their hotel room crept open, and this got confused Charlie. At first, she thought it might have been Robert or possibly Josh and Connor returning home. However, the door slowly opened up fully to reveal to be a man. It wasn't any of the boys she was with. Apparently it was somebody who was about maybe 6 feet tall. He was just staring directly at the bed, and this was when something really weirded out Charlie. This man was obviously staring at Charlie and had no idea what his intentions were. Charlie eventually shut up and screamed when she turned on the lights. Screaming caused the man to cower in fear. Of course, when he ran out, he only managed to bump into Josh, Connor, and Robert, who were able to knock down the man. Since Robert was pretty bulky and he was at least almost 7 feet tall, he was able to knock this man out with one quick punch to the head. Eventually, something never really expected, the man actually passed out. Security came and then they took the man and they ended up putting him in the police car. However, he was in the hospital treating his wounds, but then he was arrested and escorted out of Anime North before this event could go any further. That was the only thing scary Charlie had witnessed. But the very shocking thing is how this man managed to get into her bedroom. What were their plans, and what would this man have done if Charlie never woke up? That still questions her to this day, and it still does. My friend named Max went with his girlfriend Mary to a fur con that was in 2019. It was before the global pandemic hit, and this was one of the times they went to a fur con. They went to fur cons in 2017 and 2018. However, 2019 was one of the best years they went to. Of course, Mary and Max didn't have really fursuits, and they weren't really the popular fursuits or popular furries. They just come there to see their fans from the furry fandom to be in the convention. There were people wearing costumes of wolves, cats, dogs, horses, lions, even different type of species that they see and they can name in the world. Mary and Max were both about their mid-20s at the time of this story took place, and this was one of their times they had a really weird experience. Of course, surprisingly, there was someone who was wearing a costume that resembled what seemed to be a lion. He was wearing what seemed to be a Hawaiian t-shirt, and he seemed to be wearing that fursuit, and he was staring at Mary for some reason. Now, to Max's mind, he thought this guy was probably just wanting attention, probably trying to look at Mary to get into, well, you can understand what I mean by the words trying to get on with Mary. Mary just didn't pay attention, or even bother to, thinking that this guy must have been maybe just some creep, looking for attention. So as Max and Mary kept going to furry conventions, and even looked around the area, the lion person seemed to be following them wherever they go. Honestly, this was kind of weird, seeing that this lion guy was almost everywhere at this point with the fur convention, except when they go to their hotel room. But that was when something really strange began to happen. The night when Mary and Max went to the hotel room, the lion person was just standing at the end of their hallway. He seemed to be facing them, and this honestly freaked them out. They had no idea if this guy was like a fan or maybe just some creep. They were hurried to get to the door, and as soon as they did, they called the front desk and informed them about this lion person. Officially, they looked and they said they didn't have any of the lion describing being what they said that was going to be at the convention. So they ended up realizing that the guy was knocking on the door. Mary looked to see that it was the same lion person. He didn't have his key with him, surprisingly, so he kept banging on the door. Now, the security came and arrived, and they escorted this man out of the park. Well, out of the convention, wearing the lion mask. They had no idea what this man was doing, but he was not welcome there. Apparently, it was later found out the next day by Mary and Max. The next day when they were questioned by the security guards, including the police. And apparently, this Max person, not this Max person, but apparently this lion person they described was basically trying to, quote-unquote, harass them in some way. He somehow might have found his opportunity to try and stalk them. Officially, he was out of the convention and was never seen again. But Max and Mary wondered what was his intentions were. But all they can know is that their intentions were probably not really good. A friend of mine in high school named Harrison went to this one convention in 2016. He had been going to conventions and Comic-Cons since 2015 with his brother Jake. However, his friend Steve, along with James and his girlfriend Katie, were all going to this one Comic-Con in 2016. It was somewhere in July, and it was somewhere when they were taking their time to visit their family and friends who were living in Florida. Now, at the time of this story, They were living not far from Michigan. However, though, I had been in contact with this Harrison person when he came to my high school before he was on summer vacation. Since they go to Massachusetts and or Michigan for at least a little while in the summer, they were going to Florida as a bunch of Jake's side of the family, since Jake came from another family, so Harrison and Jake are half brothers. They took their friend Steve, along with James, who had a girlfriend named Katie, to this one convention. When they got to the convention the first day, they checked in their room and then they got settled in, did their own thing, wandered around the place for a bit before crashing at the first night. However, the second night they ended up going to this one booth where this person was showing them all the clothing and stuff. This is when things got interesting. However, as they were going to buy something, they saw what seemed to be a really weird man. He seemed to be maybe in his early 40s and had a camera with him. Now, Harrison assumed that maybe he was just looking at some stuff and appeared to maybe be someone with their kid or something. As he was looking around, he started putting out the camera and started taking photos of women. Of course, on this phone, this man, obviously was a security guard, asked, "Hey, what are you doing?" This man ended up putting his phone away, but his phone was confiscated and this man was suddenly escorted out of the park. They didn't think much of it and thought he was just trying some creep, just to try to get some, fun out of what he was doing. However, the security guards called everyone, including Harrison, down at the evening time when they were about to eat dinner. Apparently, the most disturbing thing was this man took pictures of Katie. There were a few pictures where this man on the phone, who took pictures on the phone, took pictures of Katie. Some were taken around her face and inappropriate private areas, and one of them was where she was sleeping beside James. Was the most disturbing photo they've ever seen. Now, they're not sure what happened to this man after he was escorted out of the park, but they never saw him again during their time at the convention. And even though they still go to conventions every now and then, they've never encountered the same man again, and they wondered why this man was taking pictures of Katie. Probably because he had something horrible to do with her, but not only her photo was taken, there was a lot of other men, but women were in the photos. It was hard to say what would have happened if it was not reported, but thankfully, nothing like that has ever happened again during Harrison's time at the convention. A student from my school, which we'll call him James, went with his brother Victor to a convention in Texas. Since they were out of school at the time, but before that happened, it was in 2018, James and Victor both decided to go to Texas for this one Comic-Con. I'm not sure what month it was, but it was around maybe, June or July. Probably July the most. But this was one of the times where they had a bad experience. It was on one of the nights when they were at the hotel. The hotel they booked at had an outdoor pool, and they really enjoyed the convention. It was mainly a Marvel-themed Comic-Con, which they both liked Marvel. Victor was 25, while James was 18. So Victor thought it would be a great opportunity for him to take his brother James onto a convention area. James had been going to conventions with his parents and his older brother for many years now, but this was no different, except for one incident. At the time when this happened, they ordered a lot of great things when they were at the convention, by buying some souvenirs for their family, friends, and themselves. Of course, James was spoiled and he got a really nice anime t-shirt. However, though, at the hotel they were staying at, they were at the pool area outside of the hotel. It was not far, though. It was an outdoor pool, so they didn't have much area else to do. However, it was open even during the daytime, but of course it was closed at a certain time at night. So James, along with Victor, decided that they would sneak into the pool to swim just before midnight. The pool was closed around 9, but they were able to sneak in there as they have sneaked into pools in the past and knew their way around. While during their time when they were at the Comic-Con, Victor and James decided to sneak in at least 1 or 2 swims before they ended up going to bed for the night. Victor ended up swimming first while James was on the lookout to make sure no one was coming. As Victor was doing the swim, he said that nothing was around, so he would swim for a bit and then James would. However, as James was on watch, he looked to see that there was a woman. She seemed to be maybe about at most, maybe in her early 20s, and she was wearing her bikini. It was weird, seeing that the pool was closed, she wasn't allowed, but taking that they snuck in, perhaps maybe she snuck in as well? It was quite hard to tell why this woman was there, but she was staring at James and then looked at Victor. As Victor got out of the pool, he asked James if he was okay. James pointed out saying there was a woman who was wearing a bikini. Of course, when Victor looked, he said he didn't see the woman and thought that maybe James was just hallucinating or possibly thinking he might have saw a ghost or possibly just making it up. However, James brushed it off and assumed that maybe he was just playing tricks on his sleeves or his mind must be tricking him. So as James went in the water as Victor dried off and even looked around and kept guard, suddenly James could see the woman walking towards him and then getting in the pool. Now he got a little nervous out because Victor didn't seem to see the woman. However, James thought that maybe if he kept his distance with the woman, maybe she wouldn't cause any harm. Maybe she was just swimming by herself and found a way to sneak in herself, so he was swimming. As James went down the diving board, he saw the woman underwater, smiling creepily at him. At this point, when James rises up to the surface, he ended up swimming close to the shallow end as possible. But with some unseen force, he was pulled underwater. And as James frantically splashed and cried out when he rose back to the surface, saying something pulled him underwater, Victor swam in and grabbed James, and they got out of the pool. As soon as they got out of the pool, they ran out of the pool area, went back to the hotel, and they went back to their room. Pretty much they were silent throughout the whole time. They didn't even bother to report to the authorities about this woman who, whatever reason, decided to pull James and try to drown him. However, though, they didn't really want to say anything to the front desk lady, fearing that they snuck in the pool after closing times, they would get into a lot of trouble. However, though, James and Victor had come to terms that whatever they saw must have been paranormal. Now, about that woman who was wearing a bikini, they were not sure if maybe she died in the hotel room or she was died by, drowning. But whatever that woman was and what she wanted, don't think her intentions were any good. I had no idea why they were going to try and drown James, but that seemed to be a mystery, and they are not returning to that Texas hotel in Texas with that pool to ever find out. James and Victor also quit sneaking in the pools late at night since that incident, as they do not even want to know what this woman would have done what would this woman have done to James if Victor had not hurt him? Most likely probably drown him or something. But that is a question that they do not want to know, and they don't want to be answered.